I'm Brianna Keeler, live from CNN's Washington headquarters. Underway right now. Is America closer to Roe v. Wade being overturned? One state's new bill puts a near total ban on abortion. The threat was so dire, the U.S. deployed bombers and ships to flex its muscle against Iran, but now allies are questioning the intelligence. Plus, chilling new audio tape of pilots warning Boeing about its 737 MAX jet. Now the FAA on the hot seat about who knew what and when. We start with breaking news. We are learning details about a letter from the White House's top lawyer sent to the House Judiciary Committee refusing demands for records and testimony from current and former White House staff. It also says Congress has no right to do a, quote, do-over of the special counsel's investigation. Let's get to CNN senior congressional correspondent Manu Raju on the Hill for us. What can you tell us about this letter, Manu?
Yeah, that's right. That White House counsel is essentially rejecting a request for information as part of the House Judiciary Committee's probe into potential obstruction of justice. Back in March, the committee launched a pretty expansive investigation. They asked for documents, testimony from current, former White House officials, a range of other people within the President Trump's orbit. And today, the White House responded with a 12-page letter telling Jerry Nadler that it will not comply with this request for information. This letter from Pat Cipollone says in part, congressional investigations are intended to obtain information to aid in evaluating potential legislation, not to harass political opponents or to pursue an unauthorized do-over of exhaustive law enforcement investigations conducted by the Department of Justice. They're saying that the Mueller investigation looked into all of this. There's no legitimate legislative purpose for the House Judiciary Committee to get this information. They also contend that it could violate confidentiality within the White House, discussions within the White House, and this comes after the White House has refused to turn over a range of document requests to a range of Democratic-led committees, as well as the full unredacted Mueller report and the underlying evidence to the House Judiciary Committee, of which the president exerted executive privilege, in which the Attorney General was held in contempt for not complying with the subpoena. This latest escalation here saying no, they will not comply. They will stand in the way of this, setting the stage for potentially more court action between House Democrats and the administration to get information that the White House is refusing to provide. Brianna?
All right, Manu Raju, thank you so much. I want to bring in our legal analyst, Laura Coates, to talk about this. This letter from the White House counsel is questioning the legitimacy of this investigation. To be clear, the Mueller report did not. The Mueller report made it clear that congressional inquiries would be legitimate.
Yes, and so does the Constitution talk about the co-equal branches of government and the legitimacy of the legislative branch to have a check and balance on other co-equal branches of government. What this letter essentially is saying is from now on, Congress is going to have to prove a legislative intent behind any inquiry responding to oversight and accountability. Now, privilege arguments aside, trying to withhold information that would actually further the executive privilege is one thing. There is a foundation for saying we want people who are in the president's orbit, who are advisors, to be able to have these very forthright, frank conversations. That's a very different scenario than saying you're going to have to prove a legislative purpose here. And by the way, this really fundamentally misconstrues that the Mueller probe, because that is over, means that Congress's probe has to be done. These were always intended to be parallel investigations. And the only reason that Congress took a back seat to the Mueller probe, Brianna, was because people weren't willing to testify in front of Congress, knowing that they may have legal peril facing them with the Mueller special counsel probe. They waited for their opportunity to do so. The Mueller report came in. It never changed the congressional oversight responsibility to figure out whether they could close that gap between what's inappropriate behavior and what's unlawful.
Laura Coates, thank you for that. The fate of the nation's most restrictive abortion bill now sits with the Alabama governor, setting up a major legal battle ahead. This bill essentially bans almost all abortions in the state. There are no exceptions for rape or incest. There is an exception for health risks to the mother. And doctors who perform an abortion could face up to 99 years in prison, which is effectively a life sentence. But this is more than just a bill impacting Alabama. This is designed to make it to the Supreme Court in an effort to overturn Roe v. Wade, the landmark case that legalized abortion. The bill has ignited a fiery debate among lawmakers.
A life is a life, and even if it is its origins are in very difficult situations, that life is still precious. Life is a gift of our Creator, and we must do everything that we can to protect life.
Republicans, you guys used to say, we want the government out of our life. We want them out of our business. We want them out of our bedroom. Yeah, you did. You said want them out of our bedroom. Now you're in my womb. I want you out. You don't control this. You don't own this.
Now, that last speaker is Alabama State Senator Linda Coleman Madison, and she's joining us now. She's a Democrat. She voted against the bill. Tell us what was going through your mind when this passed.
Brianna, it was unbelievable. It was just like a step back in the past. The burning of the witches to the stake, women's suffrage. A lot of things went through my mind, and looking at where we were going with this bill, and we wondered exactly where are we going as a country. I sat there and I listened to the majority Republican, all men. Most have women that have wives, that have daughters, that voted against every amendment that we offered, even the one about the exclusion of rape and incest. They say that they are pro-life. It's about the sanctity of life. It's about supporting women. It's about justice for women. Yet when we offer amendments to make this a better bill, to do just that, to address the fact that if the bill were passed and the woman were forced to have this child, what kind of support is there? There is none. It's a slap in the face to all women.
And your governor, what is your message to her as this now lands on her desk? She has several days to decide whether to sign it.
The governor is really in a hot spot. I know that she is party, straight up and down the line. She is a woman. I am hoping that she will look at the women of this state who make up a large portion of the voting population and understand that the ramification of this bill goes beyond just about abortion. We are looking at turning back all the hands of time of all the advances and accomplishments that we have made as far as women's rights. I'm very proud that she is the governor of the state. We have not had that many women. She is the second to hold this position. And she talks proudly of how far she has come in that position as being a woman. Now's the time for her to stand up for all women. Just like her rights were protected and she had the right to run for that office, one of these days, by this maybe very legislative body, it may be taken away. So she has the choice right now to sign or not sign this bill into law. It would be my plea to her to not sign it.
But even if she doesn't sign it, there's so much support for this in the legislature, which you are aware of. With this, it's very likely that it's going to move forward. What does it mean in your state? What happens? What will the effect be?
Well, the effects is going to be catastrophic. Right now, the way this bill is written, it is so ambiguous. First of all, it is conflicting language. You speak of when does a woman know that she's pregnant? How do you determine that? In Judiciary Committee, this House sponsor said that it is her belief that conception as a life, as a child, begins at conception. Well, if that is the case, the Senate sponsors spoke of when a woman knows. Most women don't know when they become pregnant. A lot of them look at the fact of, well, I missed my cycle. Not all women have the same cycles. So that is ambiguous right there. You're going to have some issues with doctors. Women go to doctors to be treated. And the penalties for doctors, this can ruin their life. So you're going to have more of them less likely to want to treat women. You're going to have more of the back alley, basement abortions that we used to have, conjuring of these stories that we used to have of the coat hangers. Again, this is a step back in the past. We have moved light years in the past, and certainly it is going to have long-term ramifications for this state.
State Senator Linda Coleman Madison, thank you for joining us from Montgomery.
Thank you, Brianna.
And back with me now, we have CNN legal analyst Laura Coates. When you look at this, and it's not just what's happening in Alabama, but you have a number of other states that have these so-called fetal heartbeat bills. How likely is it, with the makeup of the Supreme Court being what it is, that this goes to the Supreme Court decides to take it up, and Roe v. Wade is overturned?
Well, frankly, it's unlikely to overturn in the fashion and the fast-track basis everyone's thinking about, and here's why. Roe v. Wade also has the proposition of the trimester framework. The reason why the fetal heartbeat legislation and bills are so problematic to the Constitution is because the Roe v. Wade court and others of his progeny have talked about that trimester framework for when a fetus is viable outside of the womb. It's the old adage of saying your rights stop where mine begin, and the state can intervene when a fetal viability is later down in the trimester framework. For the courts to look at cases like out of Georgia or out of Alabama, both under the same circuit court, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, would say we have to upend completely that thought of the trimester framework, number one. And number two, they have kind of an out here. The Supreme Court does not have to take every single case that they are asked to take. One thing that they could actually do in this instance is if these cases are implemented, or if these laws are implemented and actually will be put into effect in the respective states, they will be challenged in court immediately. If the overarching circuit court says, no, we're striking it down, it's unconstitutional, the Supreme Court could say, if they're so inclined, well, we need not reconcile this issue. The bigger issue, Brianna, is if there are different circuits or different states that are competing for the same definition of constitutionality, meaning maybe Georgia, who is under that same umbrella, says ours, with exceptions included, is unconstitutional, but Alabama's is. Well, now the Supreme Court says we've got a discrepancy here, and we have to have the United States of America in legislation. So they have two courses of action, but it will not be the immediate change of events, primarily because medical community supports that trimester framework, and to suggest otherwise would upend everything.
Laura Coates, thank you for explaining that to us. And as tensions are rising with Iran, a British general disagrees with the U.S. assessment that the threat is increasing. Plus, the FAA on the hot seat as the world awaits answers on when Boeing knew about their jets before two deadly crashes. See what happened in a hearing. And Mitt Romney breaks with fellow Republicans over one of the president's judicial picks who once called President Obama an un-American imposter. A rare disagreement between the U.S. and the U.K. over military intelligence about Iran is playing out in a very public arena. Today, the State Department ordered all non-emergency U.S. government employees to leave Iraq, citing an increased threat from Iran to U.S.-led coalition troops. But the deputy commander of those troops, a British major general, is contradicting that assessment.
There are a range of threats to American and coalition forces in Iraq and Syria. We monitor them all. Iranian-backed forces is clearly one of them. And I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but there are a substantial number of militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and we don't see any increased threat from many of them at this stage.
Joining me now is Democratic presidential candidate and Congressman Seth Moulton. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
You are a former Marine infantry officer. You were deployed 4 times to Iraq. You know certainly the story of the origins of that war. The U.S. and the U.K. have this intel sharing agreement. So how do you explain this big difference in opinion, and who do you trust?
Well, it's disappointing to not be able to say that I trust the American intelligence and the American administration. But from everything I've seen, both classified and unclassified, I think the British assessment is much more accurate in this case. And it's just frightening how similar this roll-up to war with Iran is to what happened with the roll-up to war in Iraq. You have, back then we had Dick Cheney and John Bolton pushing George W. Bush, the president who had no idea what fighting on the ground, what combat is actually like, into a disastrous war in Iraq. Today we have John Bolton back in that same role, pushing Donald Trump, a president who dodged the draft, who lied about his feet to get out of serving in combat himself, into a war with an even more dangerous adversary. We're talking about the same number of troops, the same people in Congress who were saying that this will be easy, this will be quick, and we're even operating under the same authorization for the use of military force that was fashioned back in 9/11 and used to get us into Iraq. Literally, that authorization from Congress is older than the troops that Trump will be sending to fight and potentially die.
You are on the Armed Services Committee. Have you been briefed at this point, or have your colleagues been briefed on what's going on here, on this reported plan that the Defense Department has given the White House? Has given the White House a plan about that would mobilize 120,000 troops in response to the Iran threat?
We have been briefed on the intelligence, and that's where I say that my assessment of the intelligence so far is much more aligned with the British assessment, which is that this is not that out of the ordinary. American troops in the Middle East have always been under threat of attack from Iran, and that's happened a lot in the last several years, and even more so 10 years ago. In terms of the administration's plans, it's a black box. They won't even acknowledge exactly what they're doing. They clearly have no strategy. And if there's one lesson that we should take out of the war in Iraq, is it's do not go into a war that risks American lives without a plan, without a strategy. Don't start a war without a plan to end it. And it's very clear that this administration has no plan.
You're running for president. You've talked a lot during your time in Congress about not ceding the national security sphere to Republicans. When you're looking at this problem, how would you handle the Iran threat as president?
We have to take the Iran threat seriously, but we should be doing exactly the opposite of what Trump is doing. Iran right now is restarting its nuclear weapons program because we pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. That was a huge mistake. Many of Trump's own military advisors disagreed with him. We need to clamp down on Iran's nuclear program, not allow it to progress. We need to make sure that we are willing to meet the Iranian threat, but we should meet it with a response that will de-escalate tensions, that will put them in their place, not start a larger war. If you're just putting 120,000 troops into the Persian Gulf region so that it magnifies any conflict that Iran starts, that's going to get us into a war. I mean, that actually reminds me of what happened to get us into Vietnam, where we had this Gulf of Tonkin incident that was a trigger to set off conflict with North Vietnam. It was later discredited. Some people think that the entire interaction was false. But by putting a lot of American forces in the region, it made it easier to start a war. I think that's exactly what we're doing right now.
I do want to ask you, since I have you here, about this big news coming out of Alabama where a bill effectively would ban all abortions has been passed by the state legislature. What's your reaction to that and to other Republican efforts that are designed ultimately to target Roe v. Wade?
I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. According to this Alabama law, if someone rapes a woman and she gets pregnant and she goes and gets an abortion after being raped, she could literally be put in prison for longer than the rapist. That's how backwards this law is. It's unconstitutional. It'll be turned down by the Supreme Court, but we should not even be having this debate about women's right to their own health care. Women should make their own decisions about their bodies. That was settled 40 years ago. It should still be the case today.
Congressman, thank you so much. Congressman Seth Moulton joining us today.
Thank you, Brianna.
And new audio is showing that pilots raised Boeing safety fears months before the Ethiopia 737 MAX 8 crash. But safety officials are on the Hill right now blaming the pilots. And Senator Kamala Harris taking new shots at Joe Biden and his record on crime.
CNN Tonight with Don Lemon, tonight at 10 Eastern.
Just weeks after a Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashed in the sea off Indonesia, and months before a 737 MAX operated by Ethiopian Air crashed in Ethiopia, pilots complained to a Boeing official about the anti-stall system on the planes. And audio of that exchange has emerged, first airing on CBS News.
We flat out deserve to know what is on our airplanes.
I don't disagree.
These guys didn't even know the damn system was on the airplane, nor did anybody else.
I don't know that understanding this system would have changed the outcome of this.
Well, during a hearing, members of the House Transportation Subcommittee grilled officials from the FAA and the NTSB on that very topic. We have CNN's Tom Foreman here on this story. What did we learn from this hearing?
What we learned is that there are still very distinct camps in this. Remember, what we're talking about here is When Boeing put in this update on this plane, this thing called the MCAS system on their newest type of plane, a new feature, it was intended to stabilize the plane in flight. But in both of these crashes, people believe that it nosed the plane down in a way that the pilots could not recover from. Boeing's position, and some of the people in this hearing today in Congress, their position was more or less to say, look, we think that the pilots should have been able to handle this. They should have been able to figure it out, follow procedures, everything's fine. And then there are others, including pilots like this, who are saying, if you don't even know the system is there, and you have very little time to recover, how can you push it off on the pilots right now? This was a design flaw, and Boeing has to be held responsible for it. Those camps were very clear and very bright in this hearing today.
And this audio exchange between Boeing and hearing the pilots' concerns, it's pretty damning. Is Boeing responding to this?
Well, what we're hearing so far at this point is that they're responding to the big picture of we've always been about safety. We're trying to move forward. We're trying to work with people. Even there, they said, look, we believe we're moving the right way. But listen to a little bit of what was said in the hearing today as members of Congress went at it over this.
Pilots trained in the United States would have successfully been able to handle this situation.
It wasn't even in the manual that this automated system existed. It wasn't in the manual. Now that's odd, because the pilots were the redundancy. How the hell are you the redundancy if you don't know something?
So you say Boeing's response to all of this? Well, the simple truth is right now, Boeing has been hit every couple of weeks since this second accident with yet another revelation like this audio recording. That's more than anything else, more than the airplane itself, more than the technical concerns, has raised the specter of doubt about the company and this aircraft. And until they clear that, even if they handle the technical problem, until they convince the flying public, the flying industry, and regulators that they can truly be trusted, Boeing still has a problem.
The transparency is lacking and continues to be. Tom Foreman, thank you so much for this. Senator Mitt Romney breaking ranks with Republicans. Romney voting against a Trump judicial nominee for disparaging President Obama. We'll tell you what was said. We'll get reaction from a longtime Obama advisor. Also, here's Senator Kamala Harris's answer when asked if she's tired of being mentioned as Joe Biden's possible running mate. A Trump judicial nominee gets approved despite making disparaging remarks about President Obama. Michael Trunchale described Obama as an un-American imposter in remarks back in 2011. Trunchale was approved by a vote of 49-46 for a position as district court judge in Texas. And the lone Republican vote against Trunchale came from Senator Mitt Romney, Obama's opponent in the 2012 presidential race. We have Valerie Jarrett with us now. She was, of course, senior advisor to President Obama. She's out now with a new autobiography titled Finding My Voice. Thanks for coming into the studio to talk to us.
It's a delight to be here with you, Brianna.
When you saw that Michael Trunchale had been confirmed, what did you think?
Well, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I think it's just par for the course. I was heartened to see Senator Romney speak up and be principled and say, do we really want our judiciary full of people who are clearly impartial?
But he was the only one.
I know. Well, that's what we've been seeing these days, and it's disappointing because something like that, you would think that they would rally and say, this isn't someone who reflects the values of our country, and why would you speak so disparaging of a former president who is so well respected?
I want to talk about the 2020 race because you have said that you have been talking to several of the Democratic candidates. Will you share with us who you've been talking to?
No,
you won't.
But
okay.
I will say
what
several.
Have you? Several. Okay.
Yes.
So, and have you been seeking them out, or have they been seeking you out?
They've sought me out.
Okay.
And I have made it clear that I would be happy to be a resource to any of them. I think we have an embarrassment of riches in the field, and I learned a lot in the course of 2 presidential campaigns. And if I can be helpful, that's what I want to do.
I'm sure you've given them some advice. What have you told them?
I have. So the general guidelines I've said is, look, be authentic, be yourself, recognize that this is the highest position in the land and you better earn it. And the American people better believe you and trust you with their futures. And so you have to say not just what your vision is, but why we should have confidence that you can execute the vision. The other thing I've said to the Democrats is, look, don't beat each other up so badly that whoever emerges as a nominee goes in a weakened position. And also, I think, look, I want to know what you're for. I can figure out what the other guy is for or against. Tell me why I should believe in you. Guy or gal, I should say. And I'm heartened to see now we're up to 6 women who are running in the race, and that's historic.
Well, to that point, at a campaign stop in New Hampshire just a short time ago, Senator Kamala Harris, she took issue with the former Vice President Biden over the 1994 crime bill that Biden helped write. Here's what Harris said.
That 1994 crime bill, it did contribute to mass incarceration in our country. It encouraged and was the first time that we had a federal 3 strikes law. It funded the building of more prisons in the states. And so I disagree, sadly.
You said that you've counseled them, don't hit so hard in the primary that someone goes in to the general.
In a weakened position.
In a weakened position. Well, I want to ask you about that, because here you see Kamala Harris taking a stance to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. Is that something that could, if he is able to maintain his standing in the polls, weaken his position?
Well, I think she said it in response to a question. So I think you have to be honest. And if she disagrees with the bill, look, even Vice President Biden has said he didn't have everything right on criminal justice reform. So in a sense, I think that's a fair point to make. What I'm really saying is don't strip each other down. Don't have those belly punches that are just unfair and disrespectful, and that people do want to hear what you're for. Now, if somebody asks you a direct question, you should answer it.
I want to talk about your book.
Thank you.
It's getting some pretty good reviews, I will say, because it's got in it what a lot of people want, which is they want someone to pull back the curtain. And you have a lot of instances where you're really telling people sort of what happened. They're going to find out some things from your perspective they otherwise would not have known about the Obama White House. At the same time, we learned about you. We learned that you were shy, and that's part of where the title...
Painfully shy.
Painfully shy, part of where the title comes from, the idea of finding your voice. But what do you want people to take away in general from your book?
Well, looking back, what I realized is that when I was craving the comfort zone, when I was doing what everybody else expected of me as opposed to listening to the quiet voice inside of me, it was a rather boring, unhappy life. And when I swerved way outside the comfort zone and I found my passion in public service, that's when the adventure began. And I want to encourage people to do that. Don't play it so safe. Take chances if you can, calculated risks, but that be adventuresome and look at life as multiple chapters where you can take some risks, and if you make a mistake, you can recover.
You were miserable at one point in law.
Completely miserable.
And so but where did you go from miserable to I have to turn this completely on its head? What was the thing that made you do that?
You know what? I just wasn't meant to be that miserable, and I was also in a miserable marriage, and so I had 2 miseries, and I would sit in this really fancy office in a big corporate law firm, and I would cry. And I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. And fortunately, I had a friend who suggested joining the administration of Mayor Harold Washington in Chicago, who was a big progressive, and I had a junior position knocking on doors in his campaign. And he said, you're going to feel a part of something bigger and more important than yourself. Try it.
And you met a very important future First Lady.
I surely did, Michelle Robinson.
That's
back
right.
in 1991.
That's right.
Changed my life.
All right, Valerie Jarrett, thank you so much for coming in to the studio. We really appreciate it. A change by the State Department is now stripping the birthright citizenship from the children of some American gay couples. And more on our breaking news. The top lawyer at the White House outright refusing any requests or demands from Congress, and the head of the judiciary just responded.
Friday night at 8 Eastern on CNN.
Places of worship are often viewed as safe havens, sanctuaries, but recent deadly attacks have lifted that veil of security, and they've replaced it with fear. Now church and religious leaders are looking for new ways to protect their congregations. Our Sarah Seidner takes a closer look at worship security and who should fund it.
The synagogue's always a safe place to be. We're not supposed to be worried about anything. Here it's bruised up.
But Noya Dahan will always worry now. She was a victim in a deadly attack at her California synagogue. Her father, who witnessed the attack, wanted to send this message to the president.
I know Donald Trump is supporting Israel, but there is more problem in the U.S. than anywhere in the world. Instead of looking for a problem outside of the country, it's better to look inside the country.
Over the past 7 years, deadly attacks by mass shooters on places of worship have been a reoccurring nightmare in the U.S. In 2012, 6 people are gunned down at a Sikh temple in Wisconsin. That same year, a prayer leader is killed at a church in College Park, Georgia. In 2015, 9 worshipers are slaughtered at a predominantly black church in Charleston. In 2017, 26 killed in Sutherland Springs, Texas.